A Day in the Life is the final song on the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album. Credited to Lennon / McCartney, the song comprises distinct sections written independently by John Lennon and Paul McCartney, with orchestral additions. While Lennon's lyrics were inspired by contemporary newspaper articles, McCartney's were reminiscent of his youth. The decisions to link sections of the song with orchestral glissandos and to end the song with a sustained piano chord were made only after the rest of the song had been recorded. The supposed drug reference in the line "I'd love to turn you on" resulted in the song initially being banned from broadcast by the BBC. Since its original album release, A Day in the Life has been released as a B-side, and also on various compilation albums. It has been covered by other artists, and since 2008, by McCartney in his live performances. It was ranked the 28th greatest song of all time by Rolling Stone magazine. On a different list, the magazine ranked it as the greatest Beatles song. Lyricism: according to Lennon, the inspiration for the first two verses was the death of Tara Brown, the 21-year-old heir to the Guinness fortune who had crashed his Lotus Elan on December 18, 1966 in Redcliffe Gardens, Earl's Court. Brown had been a friend of Lennon and McCartney, and had, earlier in 1966, instigated McCartney's first experience with LSD. Lennon's verses were adapted from a story in the 17th January 1967 edition of the Daily Mail, which reported the ruling on a custody action over Brown's two young children. "I didn't copy the accident," Lennon said. "Tara didn't blow his mind out, but it was in my mind when I was writing that verse." The details of the accident in the song "Not noticing traffic lights and a crowd forming at the scene" were similarly part of the fiction. McCartney expounded on the subject, the verse about the politician blowing his mind out in a car we wrote together. It has been attributed to Tara Brown, the Guinness heir, which I don't believe is the case. Certainly as we were writing it, I was not attributing it to Tara in my head. In John's head it might have been. In my head I was imagining a politician bombed out on drugs who'd stopped at some traffic lights and didn't notice that the lights had changed. The blew his mind was purely a drugs reference, nothing to do with a car crash. Author Neil Sinyard attributed the third verse line "The English Army had just won the war" to Lennon's role in the film How I Won the War, released on October 18, 1967, but having filmed his part in September 1966, it's hard to think of the verse without automatically associating it with Richard Lester's film. In the authorized biography Many Years From Now, McCartney said about the line "I'd love to turn you on," which concludes both verse sections, "This was the time of Tim Leary's turn on, tune in, drop out, and we wrote, I'd love to turn you on. John and I gave each other a knowing look, it's a drug song. You know that, don't you?" Lennon on composing the song with McCartney. "Paul and I were definitely working together, especially on A Day in the Life. That was a real. The way we wrote a lot of the time, you'd write the good bit, the part that was easy, like I read the news today or whatever it was, then when you got stuck or whenever it got hard, instead of carrying on, you just drop it. Then we would meet each other, and I would sing half, and he would be inspired to write the next bit and vice versa. He was a bit shy about it because I think he thought it's already a good song. Sometimes we wouldn't let each other interfere with a song either, because you tend to be a bit lax with someone else's stuff, you experiment a bit. So we were doing it in his room with the piano. He said, should we do this? Yeah, let's do that. McCartney provided the middle section of the song, a short piano piece he had been working on independently, with lyrics about a commuter whose uneventful morning routine leads him to drift off into a dream. McCartney had written the piece as a wistful recollection of his younger years, which included riding the bus to school, smoking, and going to class. This theme matched with the original concept of the album, which was going to be about their youth. Lennon wrote the song's final verse inspired by a far and near news brief, in the same January 17 edition of the Daily Mail that had inspired the first two verses. Under the headline "The Holes in Our Roads," the brief stated. The story had been sold to the Daily Mail in Manchester by Ron Kennedy of the Star news agency in Blackburn. Ron had noticed a Lancashire Evening Telegraph story about road excavations, and in a telephone call to the Borough Engineers Department had checked the now famous annual number of holes in the road. Lennon had a problem with the words of the final verse, however, not being able to think of how to connect "Now they know how many holes it takes to," and the Albert Hall. His friend Terry Doran, managing director of Apple, suggested that they would fill the Albert Hall. Musical structure and development. In a 1968 editorial for Jazz and Pop, writer Gene Scarlatti called the Beach Boys' 1966 single Good Vibrations the ultimate in-studio production trip, positing that it was a primary influence for the recording of A Day in the Life. Basic track. The Beatles began recording the song, with a working title In the Life of. On January 19, 1967, in the innovative and creative studio atmosphere ushered in by the recording of Strawberry Fields Forever, and Penny Lane over the preceding weeks. The two sections of the song are separated by a 24-bar bridge. The track was refined with remixing and additional parts added at recording sessions on January 20 and February 3. Starr elaborated his approach to drumming on the song. "I only have one rule, and that is to play with the singer. If the singer's singing, you don't really have to do anything, just hold it together. If you listen to my playing, I try to become an instrument. Play the mood of the song. For example, 4,000 Holes in Blackburn, Lancashire, Boom Bar Bomb. I try to show that. The disenchanting mood. The drum fills a part of it." At first, the Beatles were not sure how to fill its linking section. Thus, at the conclusion of the recording session for the basic tracks, the transition solely consisted of a simple repeated piano chord and the voice of assistant Mal Evans counting the bars. Evans' guide vocal was treated with gradually increasing amounts of echo. The 24-bar bridge section ended with the sound of an alarm clock triggered by Evans. The original intent was to edit out the ringing alarm clock when the missing section was filled in. However, it complemented McCartney's piece well. The first line of McCartney's song began "Woke up, fell out of bed," so the decision was made to keep the sound. Martin later said that editing it out would have been unfeasible in any case. Orchestra. As a solution for the missing 24-bar middle section of the song, McCartney proposed the idea of bringing in a full orchestra to fill the gap. To allay concerns that classically trained musicians would not be able to improvise the section, producer George Martin wrote a loose score for the section. It was an extended, atonal crescendo that encouraged the musicians to improvise within a defined framework. The orchestral part was recorded on February 10, 1967, with McCartney and Martin conducting a 40-piece orchestra. The recording session was completed at a total cost of £367 for the players, an extravagance at the time. Martin later described explaining his improvised score to the puzzled orchestra. "What I did there was to write the lowest possible note for each of the instruments in the orchestra. At the end of the 24 bars, I wrote the highest note near a chord of E major. Then I put a squiggly line right through the 24 bars, with reference points to tell them roughly what note they should have reached during each bar. Of course, they all looked at me as though I were completely mad." McCartney noted that the strings were able to keep themselves in the designated time, while the trumpets were much wilder. McCartney had originally wanted a 90-piece orchestra, but this proved impossible. The difference was made up, as the semi-improvised segment was recorded multiple times and eventually 4 different recordings were overdubbed into a single massive crescendo. The results were successful. In the final edit of the song, the orchestral bridge is reprised after the final verse. It was arranged for the orchestral session to be filmed by NEMS Enterprises for use in a planned television special. The film was never released in its entirety, although portions of it can be seen in the A Day in the Life promotional film, which includes shots of studio guests Mick Jagger, Marianne Faithfull, Keith Richards, Brian Jones, Donovan, Pattie Boyd, and Michael Nesmith. Reflecting the Beatles' taste for experimentation and the avant-garde at this point in their careers, the orchestra players were asked to wear or were given a costume piece on top of their formal dress. This resulted in different players wearing anything from fake noses to fake stick-on nipples. Martin recalled that the lead violinist performed wearing a gorilla paw, while a bassoon player placed a balloon on the end of his instrument. Due to the multiple takes required to perfect the orchestral cacophony and the final chord, as well as their considerable procrastination in composing the song, the total duration of time spent recording a day in the life was 34 hours. In contrast, the Beatles' earliest work, their first album Please Please Me, had been recorded in its entirety in only 10 hours, 45 minutes. Final chord equals, following the final orchestral crescendo, the song ends with one of the most famous final chords in music history. Lennon, McCartney, Starr, and Evans shared 3 different pianos, with Martin on the harmonium, and all played an E major chord simultaneously. The final chord was made to ring out for over 40 seconds by increasing the recording sound level as the vibration faded out. Towards the end of the chord, the recording level was so high that listeners can hear the sounds of the studio, including rustling papers and a squeaking chair. The piano chord was a replacement for a failed vocal experiment. On the evening following the orchestra recording session, the 4 Beatles had recorded an ending of their voices humming the chord, but after multiple overdues they wanted something with more impact. This final E chord represents a 6 to the song's tonic G major, although Butler argues that the preceding chord changes to EM7 C and B, followed by the chromatic ascent, shift our sense of the tonic from G to E, creating a different feeling to the usual emotional uplift associated with a 6 modulation. Personal equals. Variations. On the Sgt. Pepper album, the start of A Day in the Life is cross-faded with the applause at the end of the previous track Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. On the Beatles' 1967–1970 LP, A Day in the Life fades in through the Sgt. Pepper cross-fade, but on Imagine, John Lennon and the CD version of 1967–1970, the song starts cleanly, without any fade or crossfade. Following A Day in the Life on the Sgt. Pepper album is a high-frequency 15 kHz tone and some randomly spliced Beatles studio chatter. The frequency is best understood as what we know as a dog whistle, as the frequency is picked up by a dog's ear and was part of their humor. They joked about picturing barking dogs should they be present when the album would finish. Recorded 2 months after the mono and stereo masters for A Day in the Life had been finalized, the studio chatter was added to the run-out groove of the initial British pressing. There are even a few variations of the chatter, though the best-known one is them saying during the laughter and chatter never could see any other way. The Anthology 2 album includes an early, pre-orchestral version of the song, and Anthology 3 includes a version of the end that concludes by having the last note fade into the final chord of A Day in the Life. The Love version has the song starting with Lennon's intro of Sugar Plum Fairy, with the strings being more prominent during the crescendos. Supposed drug references. The song became controversial for its supposed references to drugs. The BBC announced that it would not broadcast A Day in the Life due to the line "I'd love to turn you on," which, according to the corporation, advocated drug use. Other lyrics allegedly referring to drugs include "Found my way upstairs and had a smoke/somebody spoke and I went into a dream." A spokesman for the BBC stated, "We have listened to this song over and over again. And we have decided that it appears to go just a little too far, and could encourage a permissive attitude to drug taking." The ban was eventually lifted on March 13, 1972. Lennon and McCartney denied that there were drug references and publicly complained about the ban at a dinner party at the home of their manager, Brian Epstein, celebrating their album. Lennon said that the song was simply about a crash and its victim, and called the line in question the most innocent of phrases. McCartney later said this was the only one in the album written as a deliberate provocation. "A stick that in your pipe. But what we want is to turn you on to the truth rather than pot." However, George Martin later commented that he had always suspected that the line "found my way upstairs and had a smoke" was a drug reference, recalling how the Beatles would disappear and have a little puff, presumably of cannabis, but not in front of him. When Martin was doing his TV program on Pepper, McCartney recalled later, "He asked me, 'Do you know what caused Pepper?' I said, in one word, George, drugs. Pot. And George said, "No, no. But you weren't on it all the time." "Yes, we were." Sgt. Pepper was a drug album. When Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band was released in South Asia, Malaysia and Hong Kong, A Day in the Life with a Little Help from My Friends, and Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds were excluded because of supposed drug references. Recognition and reception, A Day in the Life became one of the Beatles' most influential songs. Paul Glushkin in his book Rockin' Down the Highway, The Cars and People That Made Rock Roll, called the song one of the most ambitious, influential, and groundbreaking works in pop music history. In From Craft to Art, Formal Structure in the Music of the Beatles, the song is described thus: A Day in the Life is perhaps one of the most important single tracks in the history of rock music. Clocking in at only 4 minutes and 45 seconds, it must surely be among the shortest epic pieces in rock. Richard Goldstein of the New York Times called the song a deadly earnest excursion in emotive music with a chilling lyric that stands as one of the most important Lennon-McCartney compositions. An historic pop event. The song appears on many top songs lists. It placed 12th on CBC's 50 Tracks, the second highest Beatles song on the list after In My Life. It placed first in Q Magazine Euro's list of the 50 greatest British songs of all time, and was at the top of Mojo Magazine's 101 Greatest Beatles Songs, as decided by a panel of musicians and journalists. A Day in the Life was also nominated for a Grammy in 1967 for Best Arrangement Accompanying Vocalist or Instrumentalist. In 2004, Rolling Stone ranked A Day in the Life at number 28 on the magazine's list of the 500 greatest songs of all time, and in 2010, the magazine deemed it to be the Beatles' greatest song. It is listed at number 5 in Pitchfork Media's The 200 Greatest Songs of the 1960s. Legacy. On August 27, 1992, Lennon's handwritten lyrics were sold by the estate of Mal Evans in an auction at Sotheby's, London for $100,000. The lyrics were put up for sale again in March 2006 by Bonhams in New York. Sealed bids were opened on March 7, 2006 and offers started at about $2 million. The lyric sheet was auctioned again by Sotheby's in June 2010. It was purchased by an anonymous American buyer who paid $1,200,000. McCartney has been performing this song in a majority of his live shows since his 2008 tour. The most recent performance was after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix on November 13, 2011. It is played in a medley with Give Peace a Chance. The Beatles' friend and contemporary Bob Dylan references the song's opening lyrics in his 2012 tribute to John Lennon, Roll On John. David Bowie paraphrased the line "I read the news today, oh boy" with the line "I heard the news today, oh boy" on his 1975 single and album title track Young Americans. In 2015, the Royal Albert Hall released supposed correspondence between their chief executive and John Lennon, showing the RAH's displeasure at the reference to holes in the building. This was an April Fool stunt. Live performances. Paul McCartney performed the song live for the first time by any Beatle on June 1, 2008 at Anfield Stadium, Liverpool, England, UK. Both Beatles' widows, Olivia Harrison and Yoko Ono, attended the concert. Also he performed the songs at some spring and summer shows in 2008 and 2009 and throughout his subsequent tours, Summer Live 09, 2009 Good Evening Europe Tour, 2010 a Euro 2011 Up and Coming Tour and 2011 a Euro 2012 On the Run Tour. Covers. The song has been recorded by many other artists, notably by Jeff Beck on the 2008 album Performing This Week, Live at Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club, which was also used in the film Across the Universe and won the 2010 Grammy Award for Best Rock Instrumental Performance. As of winter 2013, the jam band Fish has covered the song 61 times. The London Symphony Orchestra released an orchestral cover of the song in 1978 on Classic Rock, the second movement. It was also covered by Barry Gibb in 1978 for the film Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and was included on the soundtrack of the same name, recorded in September 1977 and produced by George Martin. Gibb's version was released as a single, with Nowhere Man as the B-side. Also in 1978, his version was used as the B-side of Robin Gibb's version of Oh, Darling, released only in Italy. Notes. References. Bibliography, The Beatles. The Beatles Anthology. Chronicle Books. ISBN 978-0-8118-2684-6. Everett, Walter. The Beatles as Musicians, Revolver Through the Anthology. Oxford University Press. ISBN 978-0-19-512941-0. Ingalls, Ian. Cover Story, Magic, Myth, and Music. In Julian, Olivier. Sgt. Pepper and the Beatles, It Was 40 Years Ago Today. Ashgate. ISBN 978-0-7546-6708-7. MacDonald, Ian. Revolution in the Head, The Beatles Records and the 60s. Chicago Review Press. ISBN 978-55652-733-3. Miles, Barry. Paul McCartney, Many Years From Now. Henry Holt and Company. ISBN 978-0-8050-5248-0. Moore, Alan. The Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Cambridge University Press. ISBN 978-0-521-57484-6. Womack, Kenneth. Long and Winding Roads, The Evolving Artistry of the Beatles. Continuum. ISBN 978-0-8264-1746-6. Further reading, Lewis on, Mark. The Beatles Recording Sessions. New York, Harmony Books. ISBN 978-0-517-57066-1. Coe, Brian. Ryan, Kevin. Recording the Beatles. Kvebander. ISBN 978-0-9785200-0-7. External links, Alan W. Pollack's Notes on A Day in the Life, full lyrics of this song at Metro Lyrics.